morning. I have the pleasure to introduce the first regular track for the first conference day here, and this track is, and the next track always also is mainly about SSL and HTTPS, and I'm happy to introduce Henning Perl from the University of Hannover, and he will talk about comparison of SSL validation alternatives, and we will see a connection to our keynote, which we have heard in the morning.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the introduction. And also thanks a lot to Angela Sass for the mentioning and the shout out in the keynote this morning. Yeah, I will talk about comparison, and I will compare and talk about different SSL validation mechanisms. And this is joint work with Sascha Fahl, Michael Brenner, and Matthew Smith. And we are from the University of Hanover. So, do you need to turn it off somehow? Okay, I'll get it. So, what will I be talking about? First, I'm just going to revise what SSL is and what HTTPS is and how we are using it in the web. And then I will talk a little bit about things broken in SSL and especially in HTTPS. And then I will talk about solutions. And especially when looking at SSL validation schemes, we can see that we have a whole variety of solutions and a whole variety of different ideas that all add a little bit different mechanisms to SSL validation and fix some things, but have drawbacks in another. So next we talk about what the best solution is. So what will the future of SSL validation look like, or why there isn't one yet. And finally, I will propose an evaluation system we came up with and discuss a little bit about that. So just a quick reminder of how SSL works. We have the client. Basically, when I mean SSL, now I'm talking about HTTPS. So we are thinking web, we are thinking secure browsing and secure connections to web server. So I have the client on one side and the server on the other side. And in order to establish a secure connection, the server needs to authenticate to the client first. The server needs to prove that that server is really the server the client wanted to talk to. And how that works is that the client trusts a number of CAs, and one of those CAs signs the certificate of the server, and then the server presents that signature along with the certificate to the client, and then the client can be sure, because the certificate agency is doing its job and looking that the server is really who he proves he is, then the client can be sure that once the certificate has a valid signature, that server is authenticated. So how does it break? What gets broken? Well, basically, why we need validation in the first place is because otherwise a man in the middle could just present any certificate to the client and then open up a separate connection to the server. So even in that case, when the client does validate the certificate it gets, the CAs could issue malicious certificates to an attacker, and then the attacker could present a presumably valid certificate to the client, and no browser warning would show up, no user interaction would pop up, the bar would just go green, and the client would not be able to tell a valid certificate from a malicious certificate. And the key here really is that those CAs are absolutely trusted. So every CA that is out there in the internet, or every CA that is being trusted by your browser, basically, has the power to sign off the whole internet. So let's just quickly look into the CA ecosystem before I do further talking about SSL in general. Those are all CAs and sub-CAs that are being trusted by common browsers. The little whirlpool in here is actually the German DFN fine, which has the nice policy of issuing every university its own sub-CA that can then sign off the whole internet. So that's just how they do things. But also we see that a whole lot of other CAs are in the trust store. Some are not directly in the trust path, but some are in the trust path because CA assigned them to be a sub-CA that can sign arbitrary certificates. So it's hard to evaluate as a user and even as an expert that all these CAs are trustworthy. And indeed they aren't. They don't do things quite as we like them to. In 2001, VeriSign was compromised, and that allowed the attacking parties to sign off arbitrary certificates. In March 2011, the same thing happened to Komodo, and actually certificates for Google, Yahoo, and Skype, amongst others, were seen in the wild. So attackers were actually exploiting that. And in August 2011, I think that was the biggest takedown. Attackers used DigiNota to issue fraud certificates. And actually, DigiNota is, I guess, is the only one that is has been expelled from major trust stores. So I don't want to point the fingers at CAs in general. I think yeah.
I don't think point fingers at CAs.
Okay. I think the system is broken. The system is that we depend on a weakest link security. We depend on the fact that every CA can sign any certificate, and that is valid for every server out there. So it's not that the CAs don't want to do good security. It is if one CA screws up, then the whole internet is insecure. So that's a fundamentally broken mechanism. So just as a quick overview for you, what other things are broken in SSL? I mean, certificate validation is certainly one thing that is broken, but there are a whole lot of others. So as Angela Sass pointed out, users ignore warnings. Users don't understand warnings. Users click through warnings. There was actually a very recent paper on Usenix in Washington 2 weeks ago, where 1 week ago, where where they analyzed click-through rates, where people just click away certificate warnings, and it was around 30% of users just clicking through warnings. Another broken thing is that the whole crypto system can be attacked. We had the Beast and the Crime attacks. We had Padding Oracle attacks, Lucky 13, and also we had attacks on RC4, which is one of the underlying block ciphers that can be used. So there's a lot of irritation. Even if I do set up SSL correctly, what are the right parameters? Which crypto algorithms must I use, or which must I ban? Then we have SSL stripping, a quite interesting attack where that exploits the fact that people don't understand security indicators, for example. People don't understand the padlock, or people can't differentiate the padlock from a favicon that looks like a padlock. And basically just tricked them to never actually use SSL. When you browse a website without a protocol, it goes to HTTP first, and if the SSL stripper blocks the redirect to 443, or if the site offers normal content over port 80 as well, then the SSL stripper can alter all HTTPS links to actually point to the HTTP target. And therefore, without even exploiting SSL, but just by exploiting how the ecosystem of HTTP and HTTPS works, can then read and tamper with all the data that goes over the wire. So that's another attack. But also, as I mentioned in this talk, I will focus on SSL validation and the weakest link of CAs. So I mentioned there were a whole lot of solutions out there, and I just want to do a quick survey in this room. How many people do know all the systems that I've mentioned here? Perspective, convergence, sovereign keys, certificate transparency, accountable key infrastructure, DANE, tech. How many of you do all of them?
All of them.
All of them. Okay. How? 2/3. How many do know 2/3? Okay. Couple of hands. Half of them. Okay. 1/3. 2. Okay, and 1. Okay. And who didn't know any of them? Okay. Okay, so I'll do this. Okay, so, okay, yeah, sure. It was about half of the audience did know 2/3 and the other half know 1/3 or less, if I'm summarizing that correctly. But nobody actually knew all or almost all of them in detail. Which is no wonder because, actually, we go back then. Which is no wonder because actually many of them were just discussed academically or just thrown out there. And that's why we did the research of putting all of them together in one document and doing an evaluation system that evaluates which strengths and weaknesses they all have to help make to further aid the discussion. So we have different types of solutions. We have the use of network perspectives, where you ask a bunch of people what they see, and then if they all see the same thing, then it must be valid. Second, we have the idea to keep a log of certificates. So each certificate that gets issued also gets thrown into a log, and then the domain owner, for example, can look at the log and can see what kind of certificates were issued for my domain, and do I have all of them, or did some malicious attacker trick SCA into issuing a certificate, and so I need to revoke that key, for example, or need to do some extra actions. Then we have the idea to serve certificates over DNS. So each time you make a DNS request, you not only get the IP address, but you also get the certificate that you should expect. And finally, we have some variation of trust and first use. To just summarize the principle, it's the first time you're not sure if this server is really the server you want to connect to, but the second time you want to see the same certificate that you saw the first time. And I will go over all of these principles more in detail and pick out one of the systems to explain it a little bit more in detail. So first we have the idea of network perspectives, and that's actually a quite old idea. Perspectives was published by Adrian Perrick, and as I mentioned, it has the notion of notaries. So a whole lot of different trustworthy entities on the internet can run those notaries, universities, Google, for example, Microsoft, whatever, big companies, or even private organizations and or private people can run those notaries. And for each connection that the client makes, it also makes a request to all the notaries. So if I connect to google.com, I would also ask all the notaries what certificate they see for google.com, and then they will go to google.com and download the certificate and forward it back to me. So basically the idea is, if someone sits in the middle between my connection and the server, it does not succeed at intercepting each connection to the end notaries as well, because the attacker, or that's the assumption, the attacker usually sits near the client. So the benefit of that is that we don't need to upgrade the server. The server just runs, the server just serves certificates, and the client can query the notaries in parallel to connecting to the server. And actually there's a Firefox plugin for conversions, for example, which works in a quite similar way. But the disadvantage is, of course, network delay. So we need to wait for all notaries to answer, and always privacy. So if I ask n people for each domain that I connect to what that domain's certificate is, then I leak my browsing history, or at least the domains that I browse to all the n notaries. And there was some convergence actually by Moxon Marlinspike. He did some extensions to that. He did some modifications to do onion routing between the client and the notaries. But it's only via 2 steps, so that can be reversed as well. So next we have the idea of keeping a log of certificates, and that is sovereign keys by the EFF, certificate transparency by Google, and AKI by Adrian Perrick and others. Which basically, starting from this SSL, normal SSL setup where I trust the CA, the CA signs the key, and then the server authenticates to me, adds a log of certificates, so that the certificate agencies or the certificate authorities submit the certificates that they signed to the certificate log, and then the client can query a proof of inclusion for that certificate that it got presented. So the client not only trusts the CAs that I don't sign malicious certificates, but also if the client gets presented a certificate, it can see, or it can make the certificate log prove to him that the certificate is actually public, that the certificate is public knowledge. And by that, the security is basically, okay, if the certificate has been published, then the domain owner could take measurements when the certificate was signed maliciously by a fraud CA, for example. So the idea is not directly to prevent attacks, but more to make the whole ecosystem behave well, and to make fraudulent CAs obvious. So with that scheme, one hopes to ensure that if certificate authorities sign malicious certificates, then it will be public knowledge in a short time. So the advantage, once again, is that we have no extra software on the server. The proof, or the short timestamp that the certificate will be added to the certificate log, is embedded directly in this in the certificate. And also we have no extra network delay. But if we do not have extra network delay, then we can query the certificate log during the SSL handshake, but must do it later. So we may still get attacked, but before a lot of people get attacked, someone will notice. So it's kind of a fuzzy security in that sense. You could also make it blocking. So you could also say, okay, I don't want to do the SSL handshake before I don't know that the certificate is in the log. And then you have extra network delay, but you also have the protection that you get a positive or negative answer from the log right away. And also we need a new infrastructure. So we need someone to run the certificate log, and we need to get the CAs to submit their certificates to the log as well. So the next idea is to serve the certificates over DANE. Again, starting from the same old status quo, we actually have a DNS server, right? But in that sense, the domain admin, so the one that runs the DNS server, submits the certificate and signs the certificate. And then the signed certificate is added or is embedded directly in the DNS record. And when the client queries the DNS server, it'll get the certificate along with the DNS response, which sounds really nice, really elegant. I mean, we have almost all of that infrastructure. So the biggest drawback of that is that we need DNSSEC. And if any of you follow the long and slow deployment of DNSSEC, we can kind of estimate that it'll take a long time until DNSSEC is deployed and until we can talk about DANE in detail. On the plus side, we don't need anything extra on the server, and we reuse the same infrastructure that we have right now. So it's quite elegant, but it has a lot of drawbacks of requiring the use of DNSSEC. Because otherwise, someone could just spoof the DNS response. That's the main problem with that one. So if we don't have security on that side, where the certificate gets served, then someone could just swap out the certificate and point the client to its own IP address, serve another certificate, and the client won't notice. So last but not least, we have pinning, and as a representative tag by Moxie Marlinspike, where the system behaves slightly different depending on whether I connect to the server for the first time or for the second and for the times after that. So on the first connection, the server sends along in the SSL handshake a tag public key, which is basically the public key which or a public private key pair, and the private key pair or the private key he used to sign the actual certificate, and the public key or the tag public key he sends out with the SSL handshake, and then the client does pinning on the tag public key, which is slightly benefits over using pinning directly on the certificate, that the server can swap out the certificates as long as he signs the certificate with the same tag private key of which the client pinned the public key. Then the client can still validate the certificate fine. And also I can do, I can have a whole server farm and issue a lot of certificates and a lot of different certificates, and I can sign each certificate with my tag public key and the client does with the tag private key. So and the client does pinning on the public key. So that's why we have an extra layer of tag keys along with the many certificates. So for one domain, I can have many certificates, but I have one tag public key. So first connection is insecure. Connections after that are secure because the client validates that the certificate is signed by the tag private key. So what are advantages with that? We don't need extra software on the server because everything can be embedded into the certificate. So normal SSL software works. We have no CAs, which is nice. So if anybody doesn't like CAs or doesn't like going to some kind of bureaucracy just to get the server signed, that's nice. The big drawback is that it doesn't protect you the first time you visit the site with a device. So something can be compensated by doing some kind of gossiping or sharing the tag keys, but out of the box, the first time you connect to it, you have no idea if it's valid or not. So what are the conclusions? I hope I made your head spin a little with all of these different ideas on how to secure SSL validation. Which system is actually the best? So we didn't know, we still don't know, but we thought that it would be really nice to compare those solutions and to categorize those solutions and to see which solutions offer which aspect and which aspects do we need when we look at SSL validation after all. So our goal was to create a tool to compare solutions, to help or to aid the discussion about which properties are important, and to organize and formalize the debate. Because right now, a lot of researchers just threw out more and more solutions or more and more ideas, and oh, by the way, here's my idea on how we're kind of gonna fix that mess, and oh, here's mine, but nobody really built up on something. So we did one large table. For each column, we wrote down one benefit. We have 12 deployability benefits and 9 security and privacy benefits. And also we looked at adversary capabilities. So for which capabilities does an adversary, someone that wants to maliciously eavesdrop on the connection, a man-in-the-middle attack, what kind of powers does he need? So first thing that's basic is he needs to sit in the middle and do an active man-in-the-middle attack, meaning he can tamper with the bits on the wire. Second, or the next level is that he also has a trusted CA certificate. So at that point, SSL, as we know it today, fails or falls, because then the attacker can basically eavesdrop on the connection. For all other solutions, that's not true. So all other solutions don't fall just because a trusted CA certificate is required. The adversary has a trusted CA certificate. With exception to certificate transparency, where the attack might go through, but the CA that signed the certificate maybe will be in trouble, because then the whole world knows that they sign malicious certificates. So the third level of adversary capabilities is to compromise and user-chosen third parties. So along with you have an active man-in-the-middle attack and you have a trusted CA certificate, you can also tamper with the output of or compromise and third parties. So at that point, every system fails. And to just give you a quick example of that, I talked about the notaries, where you have n notaries. Well, if the attacker could also spoof the answers of those n notaries, then the user would think that that is a valid certificate, and the server is actually the server wanted to talk to, and the system's compromised. So that is the table. I don't want to go over it in all detail. I think that's more something to look at in the paper than to look at it in a PowerPoint slide, especially because that sheet of paper says that I should use large fonts. But to just give you an overview of how it looks like, we have benchmarked all the systems against SSL with the CA PKI, which is the current system, and then we awarded benefits. That's black circle, or almost benefit, that's half circle, or it does not offer this the benefit, which is a blank circle. And then for the man-in-the-middle adversary capabilities, we use those kind of arrows. And then for each adversary capability, we looked at if the system is still secure with an adversary of that power. So the SSL with CA PKI is secure on first contact protection and on all other connections when the adversary can just tamper with the bits on the wire, but as soon as it'll get to get hold of a valid CA certificate, it's not secure anymore, and so on. So I encourage you to look at the table. I also encourage you to find errors, to tell us what you think is wrong, and to engage into the discussions. And we will be more than happy to revise and further extend those this table. And also, if you think that we left something out on the deployability and security benefits, then please tell us. So this is meant as an ongoing document and is meant as a roadmap to what we think SSL validation should look like. And ultimately, we would get to a system that is black, has black circles all the way through. So, as a conclusion, all systems that we looked at have some problems, have some strengths. All proposals solve the weakest link property of current CA systems, but in very different ways. In one way, I ask a whole bunch of people on the internet, and they tell me if the connection looks good. Some depend on the notion that, well, somehow it gets obvious that the CA misbehaves, and so on. So, as we have no clear winner, we can start some discussions of how SSL validation should look like. How should I ultimately prove that a certificate that I've never seen before from a source that I can validate is valid or not? So how do I trust this? Do I want some kind of web of trust? Do I want, like we have it now, some kind of notary, certification agency or authority that people can go to and claim with their ID that they are really the one that they claim to be, and then the certificate gets issued? Or do we have a whole different idea? Do we need, or have to have CAs? That's a big question. Also, but we found out that deployment is really challenging. So even if I have the perfect system, even if I know how the system should behave in every little detail, the migration is quite hard. And just to give a quick example, if I do some kind of extra information querying during the handshake or in the certificate, an attacker could, in almost all scenarios, claim to just be an old server that hasn't upgraded yet. So how do we prevent falling back to the old security in the time where we migrate from the old system to the new system? And that's quite tricky because if we can't fix that, then we don't have an incentive for servers to upgrade. If I upgrade my server, but an attacker could just claim to still use the old system, I have no incentive to upgrade, right? So, and the other big question is when to fail hard, or do we want to fail hard? So can we actually build a system that is so perfect that every time I get a certificate warning, it's actually an attack? Because if that's the case, I don't even need user warnings anymore. I can just fail. So that's also an interesting thing to consider. And by the way, Chrome already does this for certificates that are pinned directly in their source code. So for some certificates, for example, for their own Google domains, if you see another certificate that does not come from Google, then you can click away the warning. So question is, do we want that? Can we do that for the whole internet? And I'm sure there are a lot of further things to discuss and further things to speak about. So I'll be taking questions now.
Thank you very much for giving us an overview about the landscape of SSL validation methods. And Henning, I really, really like your translation of the acronym CA as a certificate agency. I think certificate authority is an internet newspeak. Okay, we have time for some questions.
How do you trust the log server when you just look up so you get a proof of the and how can I trust as a client what the log server is?
Okay. Henning, please can you repeat the question for the recording?
Sure. Okay, so the question was, how can I trust that the proof of inclusion is really valid, or that the server, that the certificate log doesn't lie to me, or maybe that's a malicious log that just wants to trick me into trusting that? Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, to explain that in detail, I would need to go a lot more into detail of how CT, for example, works. But they do that by using Merkle hash tree. So you have leaves, and you hash all the leaves, and then for the node up, you hash the left and the right node. So going up, you have a data structure that changes if any of the leaves change. So then you can construct very concise proofs by adding to that proof the hashes of all the nodes that branch from the path from the leaf to the root. And then anybody can validate that that certificate, along with the proof, does really lead to the top root hash. So just a quick overview how that works. The consequence of this data structure and the way they do it is that the log answers are transparent, and that's what the certificate transparency actually means. It means that if the log lies to you, it has to lie to everybody, and and though the certificate log is public, then and anybody can audit that, someone will notice that a new certificate has been added. So in order to lie to you, the certificate log needs to insert a new certificate into the log, and then anybody could notice it. So, yeah.
Any more questions? Let us start on the right side here, please.
I have several issues with this approach. One is that it's I think it's inheriting the fundamental problem of SSL CA by having a kind of what looks like a push mechanism between the CA and the retrieval log. So this is assuming that the attacker, after reaching the CA and being able to steal the CA's basic search for enabling himself or herself to sign certificates, is not able to prevent the submitting of the certificate, because the certificate, new one, or malicious one, does not appear in the certificate form. The client cannot validate against the user, right?
Yeah, the way they solve that is that only if you submit your log to the, or only if you submit your certificate to the log, you will get a signed certificate timestamp in your certificate. So, and if you don't, and that's directly embedded into the certificate, and if you don't have that, clients don't trust you. So if you don't submit your certificate to the log, it will not get trusted by clients, by new clients. So we have the kind of the upgrade or the migration thing again. So what happens in the time between where a server does not present or presents a certificate without a timestamp from the log server. But ultimately, if we would all use this, then clients could just say, I don't trust you if you don't, if you have not submitted your certificate to the log.
We have still time for two very brief questions and very brief answers.
Okay.
I've seen one in the, and then Angela for the last question.
Well, to work correctly in all cases except for one, that's not something that is possible by the underlying data structure, because if it is malicious by one certificate, it would still need to provide me with a proof from that certificate's hash to the root hash. So in that sense, that certificate needs to be part of the tree. But if I maliciously add one certificate to the tree, the root hash changes as well. And so maybe I have not made that clear enough. The certificate log needs to distribute those root hashes to the clients. So the client pre-trusts the root hashes. And if trusting the root hash, it can validate that all certificates are public knowledge. So.
Excuse me, can we postpone the discussion of very technical aspects to the break, because we are short in time? And the last question by Angela.
So you listed the fact that users just don't ignore the warnings as one of the key problems.
Right.
So, but the reason that they don't pay attention to them is because they've been effectively trained to swat them away because of the high number of false positives.
Right.
So which of those solutions do you think, does any of them offer a path, and I didn't see that as your criteria, a path towards generating fewer false positives?
Yeah, that's a tricky question to estimate, because and we do some research into looking at why web administrators set up self-signed certificates or certificates that are not in the trust path. Ultimately, and we see a lot of similarities between why users click away warnings and why server administrators use self-signed certificates, because they don't understand the risk. And I believe that in every scenario, it's kind of possible to screw up again, to just use self-signed certificates, more or less. So we didn't put that into our criteria, just because it's hard to prove that in the future, if we all deploy it, we will generate less SSL warnings by admins that don't understand SSL.
Of course, it's hard to prove. Henning, thank you very much.